Interview with 60 Minutes on the Russia investigation. And the nation mourns as it marks 1 year since the horrific school shooting in Parkland, Florida. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Lawmakers gearing up to vote on a border security deal. The big question, whether President Trump will sign it if it reaches his desk. So to answer that, we go to Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel. He's live on Capitol Hill. Everything is still kind of up in the air.
Dana, no question about it. Senate leaders are trying to work on an agreement to lock in that Senate vote. Once there is an agreement, it could happen rather quickly. The expectation is that the Senate will go first and then kick it over to the House of Representatives. And there's also the expectation that there will be strong bipartisan support in the United States Senate. The wild card, as you mentioned, is President Trump and his position on it. And the Senate Appropriations Chairman sounds hopeful.
I talked to the president last night, 7, 8 o'clock, and I talked to the vice president a couple of hours ago. I just told him, the president last night, that I had signed the conference report. Others were signing it, that we thought, considering again, it was a down payment. It was not perfect. It was not everything I wanted. I knew it was not everything he wanted, but he had some good things in there.
But there is a fair amount of tension up here today. These are big votes, and it's not entirely clear what the president will do, Dana.
And then what is the pitch for support from Democrats?
Well, for one, it keeps the government open, avoiding another partial government shutdown. And some argue this is the way Congress is supposed to work, negotiate and even compromise.
Protecting our borders should not be an exercise in partisanship. And I'm glad to see that this bill supports common sense investments that focus on the technology, infrastructure and personnel that are needed at the southern and northern borders to provide actual security that works.
There is some grumbling here about dropping an 1,100-plus page bill around midnight last night, and here we are. But deadlines force action, and there's a deadline coming up. Dana?
All right, Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you. More on this now with Andrew Littman, Democratic strategist and former chief of staff to Senator Al Franken, and Antonia Ferrier, veteran Capitol Hill communications advisor, and first time on the show, so we're glad to have you. Antonia, good to be here. Let me ask you to respond to this. This is Congressman Tom Graves. So he was just talking last night about what it was like to actually get this bill at midnight. He tweeted this. Here's my first look at the final conference report and supporting language. A total of 7 funding bills with 30 minutes notice. I was allowed 1 hour to review and had to make a choice. I could not sign off. So obviously there's other concerns about this, Antonia, but what do you think will actually happen in the end? Will it pass in the Senate?
I'm confident it's going to pass. The longest government shutdown in American history, partial shutdown. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell does not want that to happen again. He has a great expression. There's no education in the second kick of a mule. This will be the third kick of a mule. It's better for the country. It's better for the Congress. It's better for the president for them to avoid another shutdown. And I'm confident it's going to pass both chambers.
But what do you say, Antonia, about, though, that there are many conservatives who think that this is just not good enough and the Democrats really won one this time against the president?
Well, the president's poll numbers have rebounded tremendously since the last shutdown. My view is, look, the perfect can't be the enemy of the good here. The good is let's fund the government. He did get a down payment on the wall. And every single year since he's been president, there has been new money in there for construction along the southern border. It may not be everything that every conservative wants. They also don't tend to love spending bills in general. So take the win where you get it and keep chipping away moving forward.
All right, Andrew, what do you think?
Well, I think this isn't the president just losing to Democrats. This became a fight of the president versus all of Congress. Democrats and Republicans are accustomed to compromising on these spending bills. They're never totally satisfactory. Everybody gets something. But when the president made it just about the wall, that's like his white whale, and he only could do harm to himself by making that issue of principle, weird issue of principle, the main issue in budget negotiations. Budget negotiations are spending numbers up and down.
And certainly Nancy Pelosi, who used to be on the Appropriations Committee, knew that well, and I guess that will just be what she tries to push forward. We'll see if the president, if it passes the Senate, we'll then have to wait to see if the president will sign it. Also, another topic, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, saying that the Senate is going to vote on the Green New Deal. It's endorsed by several 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is not too happy. Listen.
Since Republicans took control of this chamber in 2015, they have not brought a single Republican bill to meaningfully reduce carbon emissions to the floor of the Senate. Not one bill. In fact, the Republican majority has spent the Senate's time on legislation that would make climate change even worse.
What about that criticism, Antonia?
Well, look, I think there's a difference of opinion on this topic. Senator McConnell is from Kentucky. It is a coal mining and coal producing state. He ran his race in 2014 on coal, and the president has been an avowed supporter of fossil fuels. I think at the end of the day, this demonstrates a tremendous difference between the parties. There is Red America, and they want to have cheap electricity, cheap fuel costs, and this is one of those things where you have just a partisan divide. Senator McConnell wants to have a vote on it. Senator Schumer shouldn't be afraid of that. That's where his party is, so have a vote on it. They shouldn't be afraid, and we'll see where the chips lie once that vote happens.
So, Andrew, many Democrats calling Mitch McConnell's move here to be cynical and that it's a stunt. My question is, then why, if that's the case and they believe that, then why wouldn't Schumer just tell all the Democrats, go ahead and vote no on this and beat him at his own game?
Yeah, they've done that in similar circumstances before. It is a stunt. It's a type of stunt that Democrats have also attempted when they were in control. So it's familiar if you've been around a long time. Democrats can vote against it. They can vote present. They can abstain.
Right.
In the end, because it has no actual effect, it's just an aspirational statement. I think people will forget about it fairly quickly.
Antonia, let me ask you just one other thing. Today is the anniversary of the Parkland shooting, and of course we have to think about all those things that occurred. It was very troubling, of course, to all of these people today. You see them this morning mourning the loss. The House, led by the Democrats, passed a big background check bill yesterday, and more is coming on that front. Do you think that has any hopes of passing in the Senate?
Look, my heart goes out for all the Parkland families. I can't even imagine. I'm from New England. Guns resonate differently where I'm from than throughout the country. I do not foresee this being considered in the Senate. The Democrats could obviously offer an amendment moving forward. I just don't think the numbers are there to get something like that through the Senate.
And Andrew, gun control advocates that want to see more action, they're not just waiting around for Washington, D.C. to do something. They're working in all of these state capitals across the country. Having more success there?
Well, they're having more success in some of the states. They're also registering voters. The big story of the 2018 midterm was the wipeout of Republican House members in suburban districts. Those are the districts where gun control is probably most salient to voters, and now it's working in the Democrats' advantage.
Right. It was interesting to watch this issue, and we'll see what happens, of course, and our hearts are really with all of those victims' families as they grieve today. Andrew Littman and Antonia Ferrier, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
So a bombshell revelation sparking major new questions about the Russia investigation and efforts to remove President Trump from office. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe claims there was a lot more than idle talk about using the 25th Amendment to replace the president before he was fired. Jillian Turner is live in Washington. She has the story for us. Jillian.
Surprise, it's me, Catherine. There you go.
Now I can
anyway,
see you.
But
Okay.
You can. I got the news anyway. McCabe went on the record confirming some reporting we brought you back in October, Dana, that he believed the Justice Department's second in command was serious about recording the president and invoking the 25th Amendment. The timing matters because May 2017 is a pivotal month in the Russia probe. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was just 2 weeks into the job when President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. 8 days later, Rosenstein appointed the special counsel. McCabe also tells CBS News that after Comey was fired, the FBI launched an obstruction of justice case in addition to the FBI's ongoing investigation into alleged Russia collusion.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
In a statement, the Justice Department seemed to stop short of denying Rosenstein talked about removing the president. It reads in part, quote, "The Deputy Attorney General never authorized any recording that Mr. McCabe references. Based on his personal dealings with the president, there's no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment." In a tweet this morning, President Trump hit back. Disgraced FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe pretends to be a poor little angel, when in fact he was a big part of the crooked Hillary scandal, a reference to the email investigation, and the Russia hoax, a puppet for leaking James Comey. It's important to note that McCabe was fired last year for violating the FBI's ethics code, and that included lying to federal investigators. Justice Department watchdog referred McCabe's case to the U.S. attorney here in Washington for possible criminal prosecution. Dana.
All right, Catherine, of course, we always know, Catherine, you have the story. Thank you. So we're politics behind some of this. We're going to talk to someone who knows how these things work from inside the Justice Department. Plus, Amazon making a major announcement, backing out of a plan to open a second headquarters here in New York City. And not everyone's happy about it.
Here. We needed this. But this guy, he wants to, basically be everybody's best friend on the progressive side of things. I want the national health care. I want all that stuff, too. But I'd like help paying for it. But apparently I have to do it myself now.
James Comey, listen.
I think the next day I met with the team investigating the Russia cases, and I asked the team to go back and conduct an assessment to determine where are we with these efforts and what steps do we need to take going forward.
John Yoo was a Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush, and now a law professor at UC Berkeley. So let me ask you, from your view from when you worked inside the Justice Department, what Andrew McCabe is saying that he did and the timing of it, does any of that sound inappropriate, unethical, or even illegal to you?
Look, at best, McCabe and a group of his aides, just like Jim Comey, were these crusaders who just didn't think the rules applied to them, the normal regulations applied to them. At worst, they're people who are motivated by a bias against Trump. They had already decided Trump is working for the Russians, as McCabe has said now in public, based on very little to almost no evidence. So I wouldn't say it's illegal in the sense that they could be prosecuted for it, but it seems unethical. It seems like if you were going to investigate the president, you should go to the very top of the Justice Department, either the Deputy Attorney General or the Attorney General, and ask their permission and to ask for the evidence that you actually have to start an investigation. At that point in time, back in the summer of 2017, to say that firing Jim Comey itself was the grounds for investigation is a very difficult and fraught decision, and may not even be illegal because President Trump was just exercising his own constitutional powers to remove subordinate executive branch officials and prosecutors.
Take a listen to what he says and what McCabe says in this excerpt that ran in The Atlantic. He said about Rosenstein, his eyes were focused on a point in space a few yards beyond and behind toward the door. He started talking about the firing of Jim Comey. He was obviously upset. He said he was shocked that the White House was making it look as if Jim's firing had been his idea. He was grasping for a way to describe the nature of his situation. One remark stands out. He said, "There's no one that I can talk to about this. There's no one here that I can trust." Well, by my reading, the only two people in the room were McCabe and Rosenstein. And if Rosenstein is feeling like he couldn't trust McCabe, I mean, maybe there was good reason for that.
Well, also, that's why Rosenstein is in the job. Sometimes you can't talk to lots of other people and get their opinion when you have to make decisions like, should we investigate the president to try to remove him from office under the 25th Amendment? That's why the president appoints people and the Senate confirms them, to make those kinds of tough decisions. I'm afraid you look at that account by McCabe, you read about Rosenstein and McCabe talking about potentially wiretapping the president, potentially trying to get a majority of the cabinet and the vice president to find the president unable to do the job. I don't think they were up to the jobs that they were in. I think they were panicking. They should have taken their time and thought about it and considered whether the firing of Jim Comey actually was constitutional and within the president's authority, which I think a lot of people now realize was the right thing to do.
We should point out that Rosenstein has disputed McCabe's accounts here. Let me ask you about one other thing. Paul Manafort, who has been under the gun legally, now a judge has found that he actually did violate his plea agreement. So what does that mean going forward?
One, it gives us a lot of direction or hints of the direction that the special counsel investigation is going. So if you look at what Manafort lied about and what the special counsel is really interested in, it's in whether Manafort and a Ukrainian who has ties to Russian intelligence were passing information back and forth, trying to do favors for each other, while Manafort was the chairman of the Trump campaign. That has nothing to do, actually, with what Manafort pled guilty to, which was about stuff before he was the campaign manager. That shows you that what they're really, the special counsel and Mueller really pursuing is, did the Russians and their intelligence agents use Manafort as a way to get to Trump, and did that affect the campaign in any way? So far, however, I don't see any evidence out in public that shows that that's actually true.
Do you think that the special counsel is wrapping up soon, from what you can see?
I think so. Yes, I think so. I think they're not really. I think you would see more witnesses, more plea bargains, and you would see more if they were actually making more headway on this Trump-Russia conspiracy to commit federal law narrative.
Okay, John Yoo, we always appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
So why is Amazon scrapping its plans to build a New York City headquarters? We're going to get into that next. Plus, a survivors marking 1 year since that horrific school shooting in Parkland, Florida, how the community is honoring the lives that were lost.
I still won't leave the classroom to use the bathroom or anything, like in the middle of class. I'm still afraid to go in crowds and stuff.
Fox News Alert, Amazon cancels plans to build a second headquarters in New York City after resistance from local lawmakers and progressive groups over the nearly $3 billion in state and city incentives. For more on this breaking news, we have Christina Partsinevelos from the Fox Business Network. Christina, what has been the response to the decision? It just came out.
Yeah, this is a huge decision because Amazon has also not alluded to searching for a second headquarters location, but they did release a statement, and it's pretty much discussing the backlash from local politicians. They said, while polls show that 70% of New Yorkers support our plans and investment, a number of state and local politicians have made it clear that they oppose our presence and will not work with us to build the type of relationships that are required to go forward. The company went on to say that there was a lack of positive collaborative relationships between the tech company as well as politicians. And speaking of politicians, we have a statement from Mayor de Blasio. What he said, and this is a strong statement, you have to be tough to make it in New York City. We gave Amazon the opportunity to be a good neighbor and do business in the greatest city in the world. Instead of working with the community, Amazon threw away that opportunity. So you have the local politicians, some of them from the Democratic Party, progressives like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that are taking this as a win for them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Anything is possible. Today was the day a group of dedicated and everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its workers' exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world." Dana.
Think that Amazon would have had a little bit more clarity about the problems with local politicians before they made the decision, but that didn't happen. What battle lines now have been drawn over this fight?
Yeah, that's a great point. The fact that why would Amazon wait until this last exact moment to cancel after announcing it, putting on this big, massive surge, getting all kinds of media exposure? The issue with the local politicians is that Amazon received roughly $3 billion in tax incentives as well as tax breaks, cumulative. And so this was a major issue. Why are you giving a large tech corporation all this money? But at the same time, Amazon's appeal is that they're going to be providing all of these high-paying jobs in the area. They're going to be investing in the local community. So about $2.5 billion. And then the trickle effect of stimulating smaller businesses. Of course, the flip side is you'll see a higher inflated housing prices. But overall, if you think of it from the capitalist point of view, it would help the economy. You have a lot of upset people about this. And just one last comment. There's one analyst that came out from Davidson saying maybe this is a way for Amazon to bluff New York and say that this is they can continue negotiations going forward. So maybe it's not the end.
I bet it's the end. There's no way that's going to happen. With all due respect to the analyst that you mentioned.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I know.
All right, Christina Partsinevelos, thank you.
Thank you.
So the president's pick for Attorney General approved by the Senate. The chamber voting 54-45 in favor of Bill Barr. Barr will be sworn in by Chief Supreme Court Justice John Roberts just before 5 this afternoon in the Oval Office. There's new trouble at the border with reports of unrest at a migrant shelter and an increase in drugs coming across the border as well. Freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, fresh from the controversy over insensitive tweets about the pro-Israel lobby, some considered anti-Semitic, now getting involved in a fiery exchange on Capitol Hill. Tensions continue to rise on the border. With Mexico police stepping up efforts to contain migrants in temporary quarters in Piedras Negras after some unrest at a shelter where asylum seekers are being held. Casey Stegall is live in Eagle Pass, Texas. Casey, everything calm there now?
Yeah, Dana, things have really calmed down, and that is largely because of the huge police presence that you have outside the shelter over in Piedras Negras, Mexico. Mexican Federale police have been donning riot gear and have been posted up since the caravan arrived last week. At one point, tensions peaked yesterday. Look at this, a dust-up between a handful of migrants. Authorities say this is because they reportedly would not let them leave to shop at some local businesses, and people got angry. Refugee advocacy groups say that that emotions are running high and that the frustration is building because inside the cramped warehouse turned shelter where some 1,600 people are waiting, it's crowded and the facilities are hard to come by, and we understand that, that's why people are getting frustrated. They feel like they aren't getting the answers they want over there, and they have to wait in that shelter until their turn is called to come over here to the U.S. side to begin processing, Dana.
And I'm curious if you know how long that wait would be, but also wanted to hear about your information about the number of drugs that are being seized at ports of entry.
Yeah, well, the wait, in fact, could be several weeks because they can only process a maximum of 20 people a day in this location, so they've got some time to wait. But as far as the drugs go, Dana, they're still coming in record amounts, according to the federal government. And there are different smuggling routes for different types of drugs. For example, marijuana is primarily what's coming up in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas into the United States, where off to the west, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine, and then now fentanyl, 50 times stronger, I should say, than heroin, is pouring in through Arizona and California's border. A recent bust in Nogales, Arizona, is now the largest in history. Nearly 254 pounds of fentanyl, worth $3.5 million, was found hidden in a truckload of cucumbers. This so-called Mexican oxy is easy to conceal, so extra attention is being focused on inspecting suspicious vehicles trying to enter the U.S.
If you need to hide a kilogram or 2 kilograms of fentanyl, it's really easy to hide that in an 18-wheeler and get it across, and the chances of you being detected are relatively small.
Some shocking numbers. According to the CDC, fentanyl is now the #1 cause of fatal drug overdoses in America. The DEA says 4 years ago this was a drug that was hardly on the radar. Last year in Arizona alone, just one state, Dana, 445 pounds, including 380,000 pills were seized. And some of these pills can be so potent, just one could cause a fatal overdose.
It's a huge problem.
Back
All
to
right,
you.
Casey Stegall, thank you.
It is.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, already under fire for numerous tweets about the pro-Israel lobby, got into a heated exchange with the U.S. Special Envoy to Venezuela during a House hearing. Listen to this.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Joining me now is Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. So there's been a lot of discussion about Congresswoman Omar. She's been in the news for the discussion over the weekend about her tweets regarding AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby. Many saw that as anti-Semitic. She got chastised for that by her own leadership and then by a unanimous vote in the Congress, for which she actually voted for as well. And then you had this exchange yesterday with Elliott Abrams. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's a sign of how far the Democrats, including several other leading members, want to push to change the way things have been talked about. But in the case of Israel and sympathy toward Israel or the Palestinians, Dana, this is a further evidence of the creeping, growing anti-Israel movement in the grassroots of the Democratic Party. And let me give you some numbers. In 2001, there was a poll by Pew, and it asked, do you sympathize more with the Israelis or the Palestinians? 50% of Republicans said they sympathize more with Israel. 38% of Democrats said they sympathize with Israel. A 12-point gap. Today, that gap is 52 points. 79% of Republicans say they sympathize more with Israel than the Palestinians. Only 27% of Democrats sympathize more with Israel. The Democrat Party at its grassroots is walking away from support for Israel. She's a representative of it.
So why do you think that is? I mean, has that been because of certain PR efforts against Israel, or is there something else happening?
No, I just think the Democrats have lost the ability to say that Israel is America's ally in the Middle East, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. They just kind of lump Israel together with all the other nations they don't like these days. And they just dismiss all the progress, the democracy, the gay rights, everything Israel is known for, including being a bulwark against terrorism that helps protect America in the Middle East. So it's a real problem for anybody who is pro-Israel. There's really only one party left that represents a pro-Israel point of view. The Democrats have increasingly turned their back. Now, at the leadership levels at the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, it's not as bad. There are people like Steny Hoyer who have always been very strong pro-Israel, still is. But his problem is his base is eroding. The Democrats at the grassroots just don't want to hear it anymore.
Let me have you take a listen to this quick exchange between the Congresswoman and a CNN reporter asking about her tweets.
This morning you said the president trafficked.
What is wrong with you?
Question about your tweet. You had a tweet saying the president trafficked in hate.
Yes, I tweeted. There's a response. You can run that and have a nice day.
All right, just from your press secretary background, I'm curious what you think about politicians from both sides of the aisle pointing then to just tweets and saying, well, I've answered that, and moving on, and never actually having to explain themselves and trying to do it in 120 characters or whatever they use.
Well, look, Dana, you and I both know there are times when you clash with reporters. Other times you sit down, you do a dignified interview. Sometimes when reporters just catch you in a hallway, it's not the easiest venue to have a conversation. So I'm not going to – you always treat reporters with respect, but I understand what sometimes you just want to walk down the hallway and get somewhere. So I'm not willing to criticize that tactic. I am willing to criticize the underlying behavior, which has been she supports a boycott, divestment against Israel.
And we should have you back to talk about that when we have more time, because that's very interesting. My last question for you, I'm not going to play the soundbite, but Congressman Jerry Connolly, he's a Democrat on the Committee of Foreign Relations. He thinks that one outburst in history is not enough to call for her to resign. Do you think that she should have to resign? From the committee, not from her seat.
I wish she was off of the Foreign Affairs Committee, as Republicans did to Steve King, removing him from the committee. Look, I think the only people who should determine these things are people's constituents.
Her constituents,
right. I don't like
I just meant the committee.
People with strong views say you should resign. The committee, yes. She should be off Foreign Affairs unless the Democrats want an anti-Israel symbol.
Interesting. Ari Fleischer, we loved having you. We'll have you back soon. Thank you. A community honoring those lost 1 year after the horrific school shooting in Parkland, Florida. 17 people were killed when a gunman opened fire at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And Phil Keating, he is live in Parkland. Phil, of course, we all remember that day very well, but you were there to mark this very somber day.
A very somber day, in fact, for this community. It's been a very somber year. For Marjory Stoneman high schoolers, well, today was a half day. That day is now over, so they've all dispersed. Many have since been coming by the school to drop flowers down as well. At 10:17 a.m., the Broward School District held a moment of silence. Students and teachers inside every classroom in every school marked the silent tribute for the 17 victims, as people also did outside the school at the Flower Garden Memorial on the corner. In fact, some schools around the country did the same. This day, officially dedicated as a day of service and love, students and adults made meals for needy children, and we're talking in the tens of thousands of boxed meals. And Parkland students inside the school provided breakfast to first responders this morning. For the teachers who survived the carnage and pulled children to safety, this day full of anxiety.
The roller coaster of emotions, a lot more severe than it's been over the past week, where it's just kind of like an ebb and flow.
There was heightened security around the school today, but only a fraction of the 3,200 students who go here on a daily basis actually showed up today. Most clearly chose to either stay home or get out of town altogether.
Understandable for sure. And then the new governor, he has a new offensive on school accountability that he's launching. What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's Governor Ron DeSantis. We attended his announcement yesterday. He's specifically targeting Broward schools, the school board, and the superintendent, but other districts are included as well. In front of a group of Parkland parents and students, Governor Ron DeSantis announced 3 things. He's calling for audits of every district's diversion programs. Those are for troubled students. He's pushing state police to improve identifying potential mass murderers. And he's asking the state Supreme Court to impanel a grand jury to investigate Broward County, as well as other districts, for alleged fraud and mismanagement.
Well, obviously, that is one way of holding people accountable. And the facts have to justify it, though. I mean, I'm not going to advocate an indictment if there's not sufficient facts.
And in Washington today, a group of senators, including both of Florida's, are introduced a bill called the Eagles Act that would, if passed, create better threat assessments for school districts nationwide to target problem students and spot threats and intervene before mass murder happens again. Dana.
Phil Keating, thank you. So a new type of arms race. Find out what the U.S. and China are competing over now. And be sure to check out my weekly podcast with Chris Stirewalt. I'll tell you what. In the new episode, we talk about the perils of overnight flights. Make sure to bring gum. That's our advice. It's available wherever you listen. As the U.S. and China compete to develop new technology. So, who's winning? According to G0 Media, the Chinese government will spend $70 billion by 2030 and add 26% to their GDP. Compare that to our 14%. Kevin Allison is senior geotech consultant at the Eurasia Group. And I wondered if I could just have you tell us a little bit about how this future is here now. AI is not something way in the distance. Like, we're talking about real dollars, real money, real jobs right now. Is that right?
That's right. There's been some major advances in AI technologies, things like machine learning and deep neural networks. Starting in about 2012, you really started to see this new wave of AI starting to come to prominence and attract a huge amount of attention and investment both in the United States and in China. So this is very much a live issue for both countries right now, for both their private sectors and their governments.
We're showing some of your statistics there. So we have a lot more startups than China, but partly that's because China, the government, is funding this work, whereas the United States, we don't do that here.
That's right. The United States doesn't really do industrial policy. That's governments sitting around in rooms deciding what industries they want to support and what kind of parts of their economy they want to grow. The United States just doesn't do that. The United States has typically relied on the private sector. But I think that one important thing to remember in the AI race, to the extent it is a race between the U.S. and China, it's really being driven by private sector companies in both countries. The United States has Silicon Valley and its huge digital platform companies and startups.